I'd like to introduce on stage father and son, Don and Alec TAPSCOTT.
This is a very exciting time. Today is the release of Blockchain Revolution, and I hope you enjoy the Toronto Star. I'm the editor of the Toronto Star today, and the entire issue's got 30 articles that I've curated or written myself or with Alex about innovation. It includes talking about innovation in the music industry. Let me begin by just doing a little obligatory cred setting. I actually come from a family of musicians, and I'm a musician myself. And that's one reason I feel very passionate about the current situation, whereas the creators of music basically get screwed. And they have been getting more and more screwed over the decades. My dad was a musician, singer, songwriter, was never able to make it, ended up being a teacher, and he had his own dance band throughout his life. I actually played in the band when I was in high school. My uncle Carl had a dozen albums. He was the only one in the family that made a living as a musician, but most of it was not through the albums that were just really the billboard for ancillary rights. Most of his money came from doing commercials. All those beer ads from the 50s and 60s, that was the Carl Tapscott Singers. Say 5 for 50 Yale. My Uncle Charles played a dozen instruments, and he actually was a music teacher, so he kind of made a living in music. And his wife, Frida, was an opera singer who, again, pretty much got no revenue throughout her life for her craft. And on the right there, speaking of the Alma Combo, that's a shot of my band. It's called Men in Suits. We're a band that we don't charge, actually. We raise money for good causes. And weirdly, we've raised several $1 million for good causes, but it's gone to them. So Alex is going to describe the whole situation with the music industry and how blockchains might enable the creators of value to be compensated fairly for the value they create. But I'm going to start off by telling you about blockchains. Now, who here knows about the blockchain? Hands, please. Okay, a few of you. We're convinced, and we've been doing, did a dozen research projects over the last couple of years. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention on the previous slide that my son Alex married Amy Welsman and her dad, and she's a singer, and her dad is John Welsman, who's one of Canada's great composers, and he makes a living. But I bet if you talk to him, he'll tell you he's not very happy with the industry. So we become convinced that the most important technology, not just for this industry, but for business and society for the next few decades, is not the social web or mobility or the Internet of Things or the cloud or robotics or even machine learning and artificial intelligence. It's the blockchain. Blockchain. Now, okay, fair enough. It's not the most sonorous word in the world. It sort of sounds like block and tackle and chain gang or something. Why couldn't it be the World Wide Web? But anyway, it is what it is. And we think that it's at the heart of some very fundamental transformations in society, among other things that will change all of these other technologies as well. Now, for the last 40 years, we've had the Internet of Information. And this is a picture of me in 1978. I haven't changed that much, honestly. And I was working at Bell Northern Research, and we were studying how computers connected to a vast network of networks, it was called the ARPANET back then, might change the nature of work and the nature of organizations. And we came to the conclusion that computers are going to become a tool for communication and the communication of information, not for data processing, because back then the only people who used computers were programmers. Well, we were right. I wrote a book in 1981 arguing that. My mother bought most of the copies. It was a study in bad timing. But for the last 40 years, we've had this Internet of Information. And when you communicate some information, you're not actually sending the information, you're sending a copy. Whether it's a Word document or PowerPoint slide, if I send you my deck after this thing, I'm not sending you the deck, I'm sending you a copy of the deck. And that works fine for information as long as it's information that's not a digital asset that I own and that I want to protect. And that became a problem with music. You see, because when I send you music, I'm sending you a copy of the music. I have a printing press for music, and everybody does. Well, when it comes to digital assets, like music or bonds or money or all this other digital art, energy, intellectual property, loyalty points, contracts, premiums, bonds, stocks, futures, swaps, digital assets, it's really important that if I send you one of these, I don't still have a copy. If I give you $20 right now, you have the money. It's a bearer instrument, and I no longer have the money. But if I send you a file of $20 online, it's really important that I don't still have the money. It's called the double spend problem, and it's existed as a huge problem in cryptography and computer science for decades, arguably. Now, the basic problem here is one of establishing identity and of settling transactions. This is a cartoon from 1993. Remember this from the New Yorker? On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. That problem still exists today. So the way that we solve that problem is through middlemen. We choose middlemen to establish trust. Large financial institutions, credit card companies, governments, big technology companies like Apple, and they identify who you are, who I am, and they enable us to move digital assets around. However, they capture a lot of the value. And they have servers that can be hacked. All central servers can be hacked. They tax all these transitions and movements of assets around. And there are many other problems, a big one being that 2 billion people are excluded from any participation at all in the global economy. They may have access to a mobile device and a network, but they only own a chicken and a mobile phone and a pair of shoes, and no bank is going to give them a bank account. Now, overall, what's occurred is that the digital revolution, this internet of information so far, has been captured by powerful forces who get asymmetrical access to the value. So powerful companies now have captured most of the value. And this dream of a peer-to-peer digital revolution that would enable prosperity is not only not occurring, prosperity is declining throughout the developed world. The 51st percentile has been going up throughout modern history, and now it's declining, and social inequality is the biggest problem, public policy issue there is. And musicians are part of that because they're losing they're losing more and more of the value that they create. But this is happening everywhere across the whole economy. What if there were a second era of the internet? Not an internet of information, but an internet of value, where people could communicate, store, and protect assets in a peer-to-peer way, digital assets. Well, this would be something extraordinary. Well, several years ago, 2008, propitiously after the global financial industry had collapsed, an unknown person or persons named Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a paper describing a protocol named Bitcoin. And the underlying technology of this cryptocurrency, not created by a nation state, but created through software, The underlying technology we think is the biggest innovation in computer science in a generation, and it's called the blockchain. Now, you think of Bitcoin, you think, wow, isn't that like, goes up and down and so on. Actually, the price is pretty stable. It's slowly been going up. But Bitcoin is an asset, but you shouldn't be that interested in that unless you're a speculator. More broadly, Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. That's more interesting. It means that Annalee Domingo in Toronto, that used to every month get on the TTC and go to the Western Union office to send her remittances to her mom in the Philippines and get charged 11% for it. 5 months ago, she used a blockchain capability on her mobile wallet, her phone, and she went $200 to her mom, went boom. Her mom didn't get it 4 to 7 days later. She got it a millisecond later, and her mom can use her mobile device to go boom, on it's like Uber, there's a teller from this company, 5 minutes away, it's a 5-star teller, she goes boom, this guy shows up, they go boom, boom, and he hands her the Filipino pesos. She doesn't get charged 11%, it's around 1% for this entire thing. So that's more interesting, but the really interesting thing is the underlying technology called the blockchain. What this is a way of syndicating trust in a peer-to-peer way for the communication of assets. And when we mean digital assets, we're not just talking about money, but about all of that stuff, of which music is a very important part. And rather than a powerful intermediary establishing identity and trust and maintaining records, a distributed network of participants does this instead. And what we're doing is we're hard-coding collective self-interest, integrity into the network, and as a result, trust is enabled. That's why we call it the trust protocol in the book. So how does this thing work? Well, basically, you've got a distributed ledger. It's kind of like a big spreadsheet or database that runs across millions, ultimately billions of computers. And transactions are validated by a community called miners. And they use big computing resources to achieve consensus for their work, and they're rewarded with digital money for doing this. So if it's the Bitcoin blockchain, they get Bitcoin for doing this work. And every few minutes, like the heartbeat of a network, the transactions during that period are verified and stored in a block, a 10-minute block usually. And each block must refer to the previous block. It's a chain of blocks. That's why it's called a blockchain. And this chain permanently timestamps all the transactions that occurred. And those transactions might be who gave money to who sold what stock, who bought what property, who married who voted, who listened to a song, who took a song and put it in their movie, and so on. So that's basically the idea, a distributed platform for the protection of assets. Now, there are lots of different blockchains. This is one called Ethereum, invented by a Torontonian high school student named Vitalik Buterin. And Ethereum is a very interesting platform that has all kinds of software tools on it. I spoke at the big Ethereum Developers Conference in London, England, 400 seats in the room, and there had to be 700 people there sitting 6 deep all along the walls and in the aisles and everything. And in that room were people building some interesting apps. One to replace the stock market. Another to create a personal identity that you could own rather than Facebook. Another one is to replace a big chunk of the banking system. Another one to create a new model of democracy. There was another one to eliminate the audit function for companies, because it's called triple entry, right? You have a credit and a debit, and by just doing those two things, you make a third entry onto a blockchain. So they're saying, what do you need the audit function for? You have a permanent timestamp record of everything that has occurred. So you hear most about the reinvention of the financial services industry. And to be sure, imagine going from this weird Rube Goldbergian system that we have today where you tap your credit card in Starbucks and this bitstream goes through a dozen computers, some of them being 1970s mainframes, and 3 days later, Starbucks gets paid. Well, it'd be pretty interesting if the financial services industry adopted a blockchain platform. It wouldn't be a 3-day settlement because there would be no settlement because you're just making a change in a database that everybody can see. The money is instantly transferred. Well, that's one of 8 big things the financial services industry does is move money around. Every one of them is being questioned by this. And these are the 8. We talk about those in the book. But what's way more interesting to us than financial services is how this could change the deep architecture and structure of every institution in society and enable us to bring integrity into the world of commerce and to create a world where there's justice. So everybody's talking about the blockchain. Cover story in The Economist. They call it the trust machine, the great chain of being sure about things. Even Dilbert's involved. I think we should build a blockchain. Uh-oh. Does he understand what he said, or is it something he saw in a trade magazine ad? So Dilbert tests him, what color do you want your blockchain? The manager, I think mauve has the most RAM. Smart manager. Mauve does have the most RAM, I think. But anyway. So this is a wonderful day for us. We're in Toronto. We're headed out doing 15 cities around North America. And we had our book launch this week. There were 500 people showed up a couple of days ago in Toronto. You get a free copy of the book. We'll be doing a book signing after, and we hope you enjoy it. And by the way, the best way to get more copies is in massive volume. Christmas coming soon. You look like people with friends. No, seriously. Let me end with this thought. This is from one of the chapters of the book. This prosperity paradox of which musicians are now suffering. There are all kinds of ways that we can fix this. We don't need to redistribute wealth. We can predistribute wealth differently. We can democratize the creation of wealth rather than redistributing it a posteriori. You can bring billions of people in the global economy. You got a mobile device, you can be a full participant in banking. You can, 70% of the people in the world that own a property have a flaky title. And you're in Honduras, some dictator comes to power, he says, I know you got a piece of paper that says you own your little farm, but my government computer says my friend owns your farm. That actually happened. You put these rights on the blockchain, you can't mess with them. Because if you wanted to hack that, you're a dictator, you'd have to hack that not just on a central server, but across millions of computers simultaneously using the highest level of encryption in the light of the most powerful computing resource in the world, estimated to be at least 20 times more powerful than all of Google. One Scandinavian guy we were talking to, academic, did some research, and he said if you wanted to hack the Bitcoin blockchain going back 2 years, you'd need more energy than exists in the sun to do that. So as we move into this new period, if any of you are dictators or tyrants planning on stealing land, you might want to do some career planning. We can create a true sharing economy. Uber is not a sharing economy company. It's a great company, but they aggregate services. Uber could just be Super Uber, a distributed app on the blockchain. We could end the remittance ripoff like Annalee Domingo did. This is $600 billion a year. It's the biggest flow of money from the developed world to the developing world. She shouldn't pay 11%. 1% is reasonable. Anybody hear of cross-border email flow? This is ridiculous that you get charged. You go to an airport, there's a 27% spread on buying and selling US dollars in the Toronto airport. This is a ripoff. It should just go away. We can enable citizens to own and monetize their own data. We all create this data, but it's owned by these powerful companies. Why isn't it owned by your little personal avatar that moves around with you on the blockchain throughout life collecting this data? We can unleash a halcyon age of entrepreneurship because with blockchains, little companies are going to get to have all the capabilities that big companies do without the main liabilities. And to get to the point, we can enable the creators of value to actually receive fair compensation for the value that they create. So at this point, I would like to introduce Alex Tapscott, who's going to talk about the music industry, and then we're going to get a great panel up here, and we'll really dig into how can this occur. I do have to say that people say, what was it like working with your son, collaborating deeply on a book like this? And we actually addressed this in the book, and we said, you know what? It was, every minute of it was just a joy. We didn't always agree, but it was a fantastic experience, and I'm very, very hopeful that this book is going to make a big difference in bringing about a world that's more fair and that's more just. So would you please give a hand for Alex Tapscott?
So for the past 75 years, the music industry has gone through various eras. It started first with the era that was dominated by the big labels, the LP era. And if anybody's seen the show Vinyl or is old enough to have lived through it, you know that it wasn't very good for artists. I actually, knowing that that's a fictional show, it was produced by Mick Jagger, and I feel like that's a big FU to all the labels who screwed him over. Then we went into the iTunes and digital download era, and what Don was referring to about moving music as information online. Now, artists got compensated in this model, but rather than streamlining and making the system more efficient, we added more intermediaries and more cost, including new financial intermediaries like credit card processors and credit card companies, who, because of the legacy infrastructure of payment systems, have what's called minimum interchange fees. So the unbundling of music from whole albums to individual songs that sold for $1.99 added this added cost of Visa and other payment processors on top of what iTunes was charging and on top of what the labels also were charging and everybody else in the system. And now we're in the streaming era, which has, I think, caused frustrations and tempers in the industry to just boil over, because this is as unjust as it has been in the past 75 years. And now, the music industry kind of looks something like this. Don referred to a Rube Goldberg machine for financial services, and certainly that's also true in the music business as well, where $1 of value has to go through a dozen or more hands before it ends up whatever's left in the hands of the artist. And oddly enough, the creators of content, the ones who actually enrich our lives, as Benji, who you'll hear from later, said, giving a soundtrack to our lives, they get compensated last, despite the fact that they're the ones who actually create the value. And the discrepancy between what different types of artists get paid as a result of this new medium for music and streaming is incredibly wide, where certain people who are involved in the creation of music don't get 5% and 10%, they get 1/1000th or 1/10,000th of the value that's ultimately created. And rightfully, this has caused people to get fed up. Eddie Schwartz put out this newsletter, which my father-in-law, John Welsman, who's in the audience, shared with me. It said, as a songwriter in Nashville, when he wrote a song for Patsy Cline that sold 1 million copies, he would get $45,000, enough to make a middle-class living. I think very few artists go into the business to get rich. They love music and they just want to be fairly compensated. Today, that same song streams on Spotify or Pandora or RDO, and the same songwriting credit to the person ends up earning about $35. So that is catastrophic. This is not an iterative change. This is a tremendous, tremendous change. And, artists are pissed off, and they should be. So in the book, Blockchain Revolution, we spend an entire chapter looking at how this technology might solve problems in the music industry. And it turns out that every single step of the value chain can be transformed in a way that's more fair, more transparent, and more efficient than what previously existed. And we actually identified 9 new ways that blockchain technology can improve the industry, changing the way licensing works, the way royalties works, the way pricing works. Bitcoin and other blockchains have a native payment application built into them, so changing the way that value moves and how quickly it moves through the system, to the point where artists don't get 1/1000th of a penny to 10 cents on every dollar, but rather receive most of the value that's created. Now, there is a role, of course, for many intermediaries in the music industry who add value, especially those organizations that represent the collective interest of artists, industry associations, performance rights organizations. But there are a lot of other intermediaries that capture an asymmetric benefit from being in the middle of this business without actually adding any commensurate value. And it turns out that this technology could present an interesting solution to many of these problems. So there is a project that's being run out of New York. It's called Ujo Music. And what Ujo Music seeks to do is imbue songs with intelligence, where it's not just an information file, but the song itself is software. And in the song are a whole bunch of intelligent smart contracts, basically programmatic language that guarantees the execution of a whole bunch of predefined rules. So Imogen Heap, who I think is going to be conferencing in on the panel, has partnered with Ujo Music and has launched her most recent single, Tiny Human, which is about her newborn child, on this platform. And the song itself, and you can go onto Ujo Music's site and you can look at how the song breaks down, has all of this complex intelligence baked into it. It's not just music, it's also a royalty agreement, a licensing agreement with all sorts of predefined rules on how that content gets consumed and how people and the creators of content are compensated when that does occur. So this is an example of inclusive royalties. So if you click on the song, you can see the breakdown of how people get paid. Now, Imogen, if you know her music, she's involved, she's an auteur, involved from soup to nuts in so many parts of it. So she's got a big percentage of the value, but all of her session musicians who are involved in the creation also get their fair share of the value. So when a song like Tiny Human is purchased for $1, immediately the value breaks down along this predetermined set of rules and goes directly to the artist instantly, prorated along that breakdown. But it's not just when it gets downloaded, because the song also has licensing agreements built into it. So if you want to listen to it, it's free. Downloading is $1. If you want to put it in a film or TV show or in a commercial, there's a whole other set of licensing rules that's built into the song. If you want to take the drum track and repurpose it for a non-commercial endeavor, let's say you're a student and you're working on a music project, Imogen will let you do that for $45. But if you want to sample the same drum track for commercial purposes, then it's much more. And the important thing here is that rather than the value taking in the case of most royalties, anywhere between 1/4 and 6 to 18 months, to reach the people who actually created the content, it happens instantly. And rather than traveling through this Byzantine network of intermediaries, it moves peer-to-peer. And rather than the artist getting crumbs, the artist gets most of the value. Here's just what it looks like if you, Tiny Human, download 60 cents. It's a little bit bright, but at the bottom there's licensing. If you click on that, you get a whole host of what the compensation mechanism is for how the song gets consumed. You can learn more about all the different artists who are involved in this and how they contributed to it and what their take is, and et cetera. So I think that musicians for a long time have been looking for a way to balance the industry such that they can get fairly compensated for the value that they create. But there's been no technology platform that finally enables it. And we think that's possible with blockchain. And it looks like this has really struck a chord, and I think rightfully so. Imogen Heap was featured in The Guardian as potentially the savior of the music industry. She wouldn't, advertise that, but she's definitely been a really important leader in this. Digital Music News has covered her extensively and what she's doing. But what Imogen's doing in Ujo Music is just one example of how you can leverage blockchain to improve the equation for creators of rights. And maybe, just maybe, we can create a music industry that's more fair and more transparent. We're going to get into a whole host of other issues during the panel discussion, but one thing that's worth talking about is counterparty risk. So if you've got an agent or a broker who manages your royalties, and it can take months, sometimes over a year, for the value to move from where it was monetized, so if it plays in a commercial or it's consumed overseas, to when it ultimately lands in your bank account, you're creating all of this counterparty risk. If the value moves peer-to-peer, then there is no counterparty risk because you don't have to worry about the liabilities of an intermediary. The Roger Waters from Pink Floyd, who has been really vocal about this, said that the deals that are made on Spotify aren't made between the technology firm and the artist. They're made between the technology firm and Volkswagen, or between the technology firm and the record label. And that many of these deals are designed to be opaque and to prevent artists from seeing exactly how money moves from the streaming company through to the rights holder. So with blockchain, you've got speed, but you also have transparency and truth. You can see for a fact whether or not your content was monetized, and you know whether or not you're entitled to some part of that value. That is an important breakthrough. So the question is, how will this be built, first of all, and how will the leaders of the old paradigm respond to this changing frontier? Some might say, well, this is never going to happen because a lot of the labels are actually the big rights owners of a lot of content. Well, 80% of all music that will ever be created in the history of humanity will be created in the next decade. So maybe it's the new crop of young artists who see an industry that's fundamentally broken, but also have, as digital natives, have some understanding of how technology works, who can embrace this kind of platform to create a more fair and prosperous music industry. And as they say, leaders of the old paradigm fight against change. I remember talking to someone in the music industry who said, the record labels will never go for this because they're just a bunch of thugs. Well, it turns out that even though they may not buy into the shifts that are happening, eventually they find themselves blindsided by that. And it's our hope that blockchain technology can become the basis for a more fair and prosperous music industry. So, thank you very much.